Hello. My next guest absolutely does not need any introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have, and it's an honor, Dr. Warren Farrell. So lovely to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
I'm looking real forward to this interview and this discussion.
I first heard your name maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I heard it shouted from a protest at Toronto University. And I've heard horrible, horrible things. I've seen people accosted, I've seen people bullied, I've seen people shouted down just for trying to hear you talk. And I just could not believe, who is this guy? Who is Warren Farrell? He must be a real nasty piece of work. And then I read your books, I watch your presentations, I hear your interviews, and I'm just confronted by the fact that you are just a lovely, wholesome man, absolutely not a misogynist. And I don't understand how people can be so wrong about Warren Farrell. So what do we get wrong about you?
Well, I think the protest in Toronto was the good news is that in the 50 years or so that I've been speaking, that was the only significant protest. The other protest was in front of Town Hall in New York, and I was able to go up to the protesters and talk with them and give them free tickets to my presentation, and under the condition that they listen and not interrupt, and then at the end, anything they wanted to ask or confront me with, they could. And by the time I'd finished, they were all very much sort of feeling, oh, wow, this is not what we thought it was going to be. And so with this, at the University of Toronto, apparently some feminist professor had categorized me as a men's rights person. And then somebody in her class organized a whole bunch of people to do this protest. They all gathered together and they created a body block to the door to the auditorium where I was speaking, so that nobody could get in. So the police picked me up and they were taking me to a back door so that I could get in. And I said, well, let me stop and talk with the protesters and just see what they have to say and listen to them and, sort of work with them. And he said, this is not the type of protesters you can talk to, because they were blocking the door. In addition to that, they were all yelling, "F you, Warren Farrell." And I was thinking I would go up there and say, gee, I'm monogamous. I'm sorry that you're interested in the FUs, but I can't do that right now. I promised my woman friend. And just start out with a little humor, and then do some listening. But and I saw later that the police were right. I'm afraid of very, very few confrontations, but this was one that was not about to be listening out in a loving way. They then had to call in the city police because the Toronto police are not allowed to touch people on campus. And so, but the city police, did prevent them from creating the block finally, but that was an hour later. And about, 2/3 of the people that were coming to the presentation, just gave up and, left. This all derived from a book I wrote called The Myth of Male Power and Why Men Are the Way They Are, where I began to say that women have a perspective that I'm very glad we've listened to. And I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City for 3 years and spoke all around the world on behalf of women's issues. And so I was certainly very compassionate toward the whole concept of empowering women. But I got involved in feminism because I wanted to empower women. I didn't get involved with feminism to have them make men into the enemy and call it the patriarchy, who makes rules to benefit men at the expense of women. That's not what men do. The great majority of men don't do that. Usually when men have children, what they end up doing is oftentimes quitting jobs that they love, like being a musician, artist, a writer, or an actor. And I started these men's groups that the National Organization for Women asked me to start. I found that these men were all giving up jobs that they loved, like being I remember one man in one of my men's groups was an elementary school teacher, and he was the sweetest, loving, most caring man you could imagine, and he just loved kids. But when his first child was born, he realized he had to give up, that he wasn't making enough money as an elementary school teacher. And now with his wife deciding that she wanted to be full-time with the children, he had to give up his job as an elementary school teacher and take something that he absolutely hated, which was becoming a principal or a superintendent of schools, because he hated administration. So when we gave up what we loved to do what we would benefit our wife and children, that was one thing, to make that sacrifice. But then to be told that that was an example of male privilege and male power just didn't feel right to the men in my men's groups. And those men included John Lennon and John Gray and John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. And aside from those three Johns, included a lot of men who had were successful, and a lot of men who were not by standard operating procedures considered successful, but they were caring, loving men, which I consider successful.
I really want to come back to your John Lennon story because I've read about that and heard about it, and it's unbelievable, your history of him. But it also resonates me in a personal way. I remember talking to my sister a few years ago, and she was trying to explain to me how much my mum sacrificed for me and my sister, which is undoubtedly true, and she did make sacrifices to raise us. But I remember trying to explain to her the sacrifices our dad also made by, in a different way. He went to work. I never saw him. He traveled the world. I really had not much of a relationship with him, and he didn't have much of a relationship with any of his friends. And upon retirement, he was very lonely, I think. And my mum, after retired, lots of friends. So I feel like the sacrifices he made to work and not stay home, to bring that money in, he paid for that, the biggest price of that sacrifice after retirement. And I just didn't understand how anyone could say both my parents aren't sacrificing for this family.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit more about that.
In relation to your dad.
What are the different sacrifices parents make for their children?
Absolutely. And first of all, a dad is very fortunate when he has a son like you that even recognizes that is true.
Thank you.
And, a lot of men do not mind making the sacrifices, but they do mind making them and then being criticized. Dads often face what I call the father's catch-22. They learn to love their family by being away from the love of their family. And so, for example, if a father is a local salesperson at product X, and then a child comes and he says, in order I need to earn more money, but that requires him being away from home significantly more and not being able to necessarily get back for a recital or a birthday that you might do. And most people don't understand that for most fathers that is very challenging and very isolating. And as you were saying very perceptively a few minutes ago, that at the end of this process, often the men do not have close men friends, and the moms do develop close women friends, so they don't feel so isolated and lonely. And it's one of the reasons why men and women over 85, men are 1,750% more likely to commit suicide than women over the age of 85, because oftentimes, especially if the mother disappears or dies before the father does, the father usually has nobody left to feel like he's connected to them. And so what has been completely misunderstood about men is how much we gain from the process of loving and being loved, and how much we desire that. And the Pew Research Center, PEW, which is one of the largest research centers in the world, and Ben's Liberal, asked men for the first time what they wanted. If these were all full-time working men that were asked this question, and they were asked, if you had the option, which would you prefer to do? Continue to work full-time or be with your children full-time? And they expected like 10% of the men to say full-time, but 49% of the men said they would prefer to be with the children full-time. That is basically reverse traditional roles with the woman. But they didn't. They felt the family needed the money, so they were willing to do that, even though they'd prefer to do the reverse. Now, that's the first time that question was even asked of men, and the great majority of people don't even have a clue that would be the answer that men would give.
I think, other polls I've seen is that the ultimate ambition for both mothers and fathers is part-time work, part-time parenting, and that's an ambition that more mothers get to live than fathers.
Absolutely, and just to be precise with you about exactly that, and why you're right, is that when children are born, women, 40% of women work full time, 40% are with the children full time, 20% are with the children part time. But even the ones that work full time with the children in the United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates full time as 35 hours a week or more, whereas and so it really is, and the women who have children are likely to work about 36, 37 hours per week. So they cut back oftentimes on the amount of hours that they have, even when they're statistically recorded as working full time.
We're never thankful enough of our parents, but I feel like the things we thank our mother for, we don't really thank our dad for. I know you wrote about this in The Boy Crisis, how, it's not uncommon to thank mum for cooking a delicious dinner, and we should do that. But the things that the dad provides, like keeping the light on, keeping the water running, no one ever thanks their dad for, this is some great tap water, dad. This is a brilliant light. So
Yes.
what do you think we don't see the things that dads do as much, and we don't thank them as much as a result?
Well, first of all, they're not around.
Mm,
When you see, you don't. It's hard for the average child to visualize. Let's say your dad is a lumberjack, and or a construction worker. Being a lumberjack is the most one of the most hazardous job, and a lot of men are killed that way. And your dad is risking his life every day. Or a construction worker in the United States, one construction worker dies every work day hour in the United States, and many, many more are injured falling off ladders and roofs and stuff like that. Sometimes I will ask people to just sort of imagine that we're speaking in an auditorium, and I'll just say, just look around you in this auditorium and look at the lumber that was used to build this
mm,
auditorium, and look at where it started with that lumberjack risking his life, and then a long haul truck driver, also one of the most dangerous jobs, risking his life 99% of the time, his rather than hers. Getting the lumber here, and then it goes to a lumber yard, and then it's picked up by a construction worker, who's also one of the most hazardous jobs, and that's just the wood here. And then look at you did you use the restroom, and who puts in the sewers and cleans out the sewers, and so on, and all these jobs that are surrounding us all the time. We see the outcome, but we don't think of the men, the fathers, that are devoting their lives to doing things that nobody else wants to do, and say, "Thank you, Dad, for doing these things." And even though saw less of you, I know that every moment that you were working to put me through into a better school, better option than you had. I had a very interesting experience once earlier in my career, and when I was in the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, Gloria Steinem and I were in a cab, and we were talking about male power and female powerlessness, and the cab driver says, "Are you Miss Steinem?" And we go, "Yes." She did. I go, "Yes," and he said, "Well, would it be okay if I said something?" And Gloria Steinem was a very gracious woman, and said, "Yeah, absolutely." And he said, "I hear you talking about all this male power, but do you have a sense of about how many hours a week I and most cab drivers here in New York City work?" And we go, "Probably 40 hours a week." And he goes, "No, the average among all of us, including myself, is about 70 hours per week." And he said, "Do you think I like driving a cab and would drive a cab if I didn't have children and didn't have a wife to support?" And we sort of go, "I guess not." And he went on, he said, "Yeah, I hear you guys calling this power, but that doesn't feel right to me. It feels
mm.
like, like we're doing something because we love our children and love our wife. And this is the way we sacrifice our lives to support them." And so that was one experience in the cab. Another experience in the cab was after I moved to California. I was now an Uber driver who used to be a cab driver. And he said, when he heard what I was doing, he said, I have something I need to tell you. He said, "I drove a cab all my life. I hate it. I don't hate it if it was 10, 15, 20 hours a week, but I hate it being 65, 70 hours a week. And I did it though because we have a daughter, and I wanted that daughter to be the first person in our family lineage to go to college. I was so proud of her. She was smart, and then he talked about how smart she was, and he said, and she finally went to the University of California at Santa Cruz, and so I was so happy at our first Thanksgiving. We came back, and I said, "What did you learn in college?" And she said, "Well, a lot of things." And she said, "I learned that there's a patriarchy, and every man is part of that patriarchy, and the patriarchy is was a set of people who designed rules to benefit men at the expense of women, and the patriarchs were really our oppressors, and that women were oppressed. And the dad and this cab driver said, my mouth just fell. I felt
Mm.
like everything I had lived for and yearned for was now and sacrificed for, and suddenly I'm the oppressor. I just felt so hurt. He said, at that point in time, I cut back to driving 35, 40 hours a week because no way, shape, or form was I going to make these types of sacrifices for this type of lack of appreciation, or being worse than a lack of appreciation, being called an oppressor. And so that's, so deeply sad for, I think, pretty obvious reasons.
I mean, every time you speak, Warren, it just resonates to me so heavily. I agree. Like, my dad was a servant of his family. Like, you could not meet a kinder, more gentle man. He never raised his voice. He certainly wasn't violent. I feel it's so unfair to say he's a patriarch. I mean, patriarchy quite literally means father, ruler.
Yes. Yes.
Fathers aren't the ruler of the family. If you met my mum, she's the ruler. I'm seeing the patriarchy concept come back and back, especially after the election, which we've just had in America. But just how harmful do you think this concept of the patriarchy is, both to families, but more broadly as well to society and men and women's relationship with each other?
When I did the interviews for the Boy Crisis book, I spoke to young man after young man. I remember doing one interview. I was talking about, how what boys hear in high school about, there being a patriarchy and the future is female, and hashtag Me Too, particularly hashtag Me Too. And as I was talking about this, a young man walked by, like he looked like he was about a junior or so in high school, and he went to an all boys private school. So I said, "What do you learn in school about males and females?" And he said, and he went right into, "I learned that the future is female. Men are part of the patriarchy, just like what I was saying before, and we're the oppressors. They made rules to benefit men at the expense of women." It went on and on about all the things, And he said the hashtag Me Too. I really, on the one hand, I wanted to support it, but on the other hand, there's another side that is just not talked about, it would seem. And so he just looked a little depressed, and I said, "What's happening? You look really down." And he said, "Well, I don't really know that I want to say it." And I encouraged him, and he said, "I often feel like I just shouldn't have been born a male."
Yeah.
And that's really what it ends up being for so many men today. So I
Mm.
said, "Do you have a?" I said, "I get it from you, a heterosexual vibe. Are you? Am I correct?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "So when you talk to your girlfriend about this, what does she say?" "Oh my God, I wouldn't talk with my girlfriend about this. She's a feminist, and so I just keep this to myself." And I said, "Well, are you thinking about possibly marrying her?" Um, yeah, probably, possibly. Yeah. Would you talk to her about this before you married her? Um, I don't know. Maybe I guess I should. Huh? And just how lost he was, and how unhealthy it is to be keeping all these feelings to himself, and the one woman he's closest to in his entire life
Mm.
feels he can't speak to. And this has been the outcome for so many men. And one of the reasons that the elections were so moved toward Trump is that so many, Trump appealed to the macho type of male, but at least he was appealing to some type of masculinity being good, which I don't think. I think there's a huge difference between heroic intelligence and health intelligence, and Trump was appealing a lot more to heroic intelligence, which is not, in my opinion, health intelligence. But at least the men didn't feel like they were part of the patriarchy, and they were, oppressors and that type of thing, and that, which is what the left is telling them, and Kamala Harris's campaign was, totally female oriented and reproductive rights and so on, all of which I agree with. But the Democratic Party in the United States had 16 areas of concern. One of those, a primary one, of course, was women. But in all 16 areas of the concern, men are not even mentioned. And the average person doesn't know that statistic, but they pick up that vibe everywhere. And so, if the Democratic Party is going to be able to be a powerful party equal to the type of person that Trump is conducting, it really needs to do some introspection and to understand that it isn't a world of males, the oppressors, and women, the oppressed.
Absolutely. Um, I'd love to go back to a little bit about your history. You mentioned about the National Organization for Women. I mean, for those who don't know, you were, and you might even still be, the only man ever elected 3 times to the board of directors for the New York division. I suppose back in the day, you were perhaps the world's most famous male feminist. You've done more for women than I could ever do in 10 lifetimes. And I wanted love to know, where did it go wrong for you at the Now? Why did you decide to leave them behind?
Well, first of all, my former wife became a White House fellow. And so I moved with her down to Washington, D.C., outside of New York City. So that was part of it. But just before I moved, I was beginning to see, and this is in 19, I think, 74, 73. And there was the beginning of divorces in the United States. And the early evidence was coming out showing that the children of divorce were not doing well if they were dad deprived, but they were doing better if they were not, if the father was like equally involved with the family. So I brought this up to the board members of Now, and they looked, and I drew total silence. And finally, somebody said to me, "No, Warren, if you're suggesting that when there's a divorce, that the man and woman, that the dad and mom should have equal rights to the children, we're going to lose a lot of feminists who feel like they're oftentimes alienated from the father. They made a mistake, they know who they married. They maybe met a new man, or they want to get a job out of state, and they want the freedom to have that job out of state and maybe move with the new man out of state and take the children with them. They don't want us to be telling them that the father has as much right to the children as not, especially if that man has been abusive or whatever." And I said, the abusive part, we have an in-depth discussion about that. But for the average child, it looks like the data is showing that the children do better when they have both father and mother involvement. And they said, well, even you, Warren, have acknowledged that this is the early stage of the research. We don't know 20, 30 years from now whether this might just be a little glitch and the kids do perfectly fine. So why don't you rethink what you're saying? And wait for more research. And I knew what this meant, because they pointed out, as I already knew, that about 90% of my speaking engagements came from feminist referrals and organizing, and so and financially I was doing extremely well, and that this would basically mean me going from very okay financially to basically losing my feminist base of referrals, which is pretty much all of them. And so I knew that the price that I would pay would be big. I didn't know how big it was, but I knew it would be huge. But I decided that, what good am I if I'm not doing what I feel is right? Then why even continue this process? Why not just teach in college? And so I decided to continue the research, and then I began to articulate what I felt was really positive about feminism, which is empowering women, and what I felt was negative about feminism, which was the anti-male attitude and the women as victim. In the long run, nobody admires and respects a victim, and I want women to be respected. And to be respected, we need to focus on the empowerment of women.
Yes. One of the things you mentioned there is dad deprivation. And in my 5-year journey running this account and researching these issues, that seems to be a common denominator behind so many different things. So last question in this section, I'd just love to know, what is dad deprivation and how is solving that problem going to benefit not just children and dads, but all of us as a society?
Absolutely. When I first submitted my proposal to my publisher for the Boy Crisis book, I had 10 causes of the boy crisis. Each one of us was going to get a chapter or two. And then as I started researching them, I found that all the causes were more correlations, but one cause stood out far more powerfully than any other. And that is that children deprived of dads were the ones who are most likely to be school shooters, in prison, drop out of high school, be depressed, be addicted to video games, and being addicted to drugs, being addicted to porn, and on and on. And I ended up with 70 different metrics in the ways that boys with dad deprivation were likely to be to suffer. Now, interestingly, girls who are dad deprived suffered in almost all of those areas, and a couple that boys didn't suffer as much in. But they didn't suffer nearly as intensely. And then I started seeing that this was not just the United States. In all 63 of the largest developed nations, definitely including the UK, boys were falling significantly behind girls in every subject matter area. Even in math, now it's about equal. Girls are a little bit ahead. That's the only area where the boys have a slight edge. But especially in falling behind, boys are in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of success or failure. And now I have found that of all the causes of the boy crisis, dad deprivation is the single biggest one. I want to make it really clear, first of all. I think among the hardest working people in the United States and UK and all over the developed world are still moms and single moms. They're almost all overwhelmed, and a lot of the children raised by single moms do just fine. To the mom's great credit, but among the people who do badly, who are failures to launch, who drop out of high school, who are in the prison population. When I ran for governor of California some years ago, I went to a number of prisons and I asked them, how many of you did not have much involvement from your dad? And, about 90% of the prisoners said that was their case. And when I started talking about the value of dads to children, these prisoners came up with me afterwards. They didn't want to say this in front of the other prisoners, so they asked me to sort of step aside with them. And these guys had muscles like I'll never have, tattoos and and so on. And they're just holding back tears or crying. And they said to me, until today, I just wanted to die in prison. I thought I was hopeless. But when I heard all the importance of what dads do, I just wanted to get out of here as fast as possible and help prevent my kids from making the mistakes that I've made. And it really changed my life just by knowing that.
Of course, it's a sort of a cyclical thing because those men in prison, they probably have children, perhaps boys, and now those boys are being deprived now again because their dads are in prison, and those men in prison, they're probably deprived from their dads for different reasons. And so it's like a generational issue. I mean, I live in London. It's impossible not to talk about the gang problem we have in London, especially in like knife crime. But
yes,
I also learned from you, Warren, that a lot of boys join gangs because they're looking for that sense of family and belonging and fatherhood.
Absolutely. So imagine this scenario. The mom brings up the boy, and then he goes from a mother-only home, imagine, to a female-only elementary school, to a female teacher-only elementary school. He has no role model of constructive, positive masculinity. So he begins to feel the absence of that. And then some gang leader offers him the opportunity to have a family, to have a reputation, to if they take certain risks, or they steal certain things, or they harm certain people, to show that they're loyal to the gang. And his need to feel a family, the need to feel a male role model, he's sucked into the destructive male role models. He notices that the girls are most attracted to the guys that have really nice cars and and have a little bit of money that they can take them out. Because he's sort of a failure to launch, he's flipping hamburgers at the equivalent of a McDonald's, and he doesn't have that type of money. But some drug dealer says, listen, you can make 10 times the amount of money you're making at that flipping hamburger McDonald's place. And so he's sucked into that because he wants to be loved by a woman. He wants to be attractive. He wants to feel like to have the displays of being in charge and being productive and having money, even though it's coming from dealing drugs. When Hitler Youth was formed, Hitler Youth looked at looked for recruits to boys who were fatherless. And when if you watch the movie Spotlight about priests abusing boys and molesting boys, they acknowledged that they looked for boys who were dad deprived, or they didn't use the word dad deprived, but who were fatherless, they said.
It's just that, and again, it's all antithetical to what I see on the TV, where dads are constantly derided, mocked, made fun of, and we always just get these doofus dads. But one of the things I love about your work, Warren, is that, especially now in the current climate, the political climate, everyone seems to be wanting to divide men from women and women from men. But you, as always, especially in your new book, Role-Mate to Soulmate, are always about bringing men and women together. So I would love to hear a bit more about your new book, what it's about, and what you can teach us about it.
Yes, bigger picture first. I mentioned a little while ago that I originally defined dad deprivation as the number one cause of the boy crisis, but I came to realize that it's actually the number two cause. That the number one cause is parents getting divorces that often led to the mom having the right to the children and the dad having to fight for children, but left the children very frequently dad deprived. Now, then I started looking at, well, what causes these divorces? And I saw that the Achilles heel of all human beings, men, women, straight, gay, is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And I started thinking about that and realizing that historically speaking, when you heard criticism, it was a potential enemy. And so it was functional to get up your defenses so the enemy wouldn't kill you, or just kill the enemy before the enemy killed you. And that was functional for survival, but it's totally dysfunctional for love. I had an instinct as to what could potentially be done to be able to help people hear criticism so their wife or husband or did not have to walk on eggshells all the time and figure out just the right time and place and way and tone of voice to speak about something, and then fear having their partner become defensive and having it not be even worth having brought it up to begin with. And that's the status for most people. And it's worse than that for couples who have children, because when you have children, you have more reason to stay together. So many married people with children are more in what I call minimum security prison marriages. They don't know how to really get out because they don't want to hurt the children. At the same time, they feel really lonely and isolated and like they're walking on eggshells. The first step of the Role-Mate to Soulmate book is knowing how to appreciate your partner at multiple levels of specificity. Not just saying you cooked a good dinner, but I just loved how the skin on that turkey is so crisp, and the dressing is so moist, and the spices are really so great, and the spices are whatever they are, and actually mentioning those things so somebody feels understood and appreciated. So the first thing you need to do is fill your reservoir of love with appreciations. You need to know how to do that. And they need to not be general appreciations, but very specific appreciations that leaves your partner seen.
I mean, I absolutely just love listening to you speak, Warren. Everything seems to be about talking, communication, even like the way we started about the people that protested you, that seemingly hate you. Your first response is to go and talk to them, to sort of build bridges. And I can't help but feel like that's exactly what we need. I wonder if your book has sort of utility outside of a relationship to help bridge the gap between men and women, more generally speaking, especially now.
It does. There's a section of the book called From Civil War to Civil Dialogue. And so once a couple learns how to do this with their partner, I then teach them how to do this with somebody in your family who you love, but who has political opinions that are very different from yours. And so I outlined some 7 different steps of modifying what they learned to hear their loved partner, to do it with somebody that they love in their family, but have, again, very different political opinions. Discuss a number of things like how to do this even if they're not willing to do with you, something I call alone power, and how to do it at multiple levels of specificity, and how to find the common denominator between you and that person that is even just a colleague, feeling that their values and your values are just too much apart, and you sort of end up disliking them and loving them at the same time.
So, I mean, I guess that's a great question to end on. I would just love to know, what advice could you give to people listening that want to speak to those who they disagree with? How could we be better listeners and give space to those that don't like us or disagree with us? How can we be better, a more cohesive society?
Yes. Well, we don't have enough time to go into it now, but in the Role Mate to Soulmate book, I work with you as to how to find the virtue that, when taken to its extreme, becomes a vice. So, for example, somebody might be a Republican, and they feel that all this this cancel culture and this hashtag Me Too are all just poison. But instead of looking for the poison, first find what was the original virtue. The virtue of having people, groups that were excluded, become part of the working culture. So before it became a vice by turning into cancel culture and hashtag Me Too, find the original best intent. Look at your daughter and say, is there opportunities that she sees as being for her that she never would have seen without the feminist movement, that the feminist movement opened up? So you're seeing the virtue to feminism before you see the vice of male hating and patriarchy and hashtag Me Too without a hashtag Men Too, and the victim power that feminism has drifted into, and so on. And so, but again, each person can start just promising to do it for the person in their family that they love, without requiring it to be done in the opposite way.
Beautiful advice. Thank you, Warren. So where can we find your book, and where can we read more about you?
Well, if money is an issue, Amazon has a 30% sale on the Role Mate to Soulmate book. And there's a paperback of The Boy Crisis. Both of them are in Audible form. However, I would, if you're getting the Role Mate to Soulmate book, be sure to get with it. I put it for practically free, a QR code that you can get the online video course of the Role Mate to Soulmate book. You can read the wisdom of not being defensive in response to criticism, but I guarantee you that when the criticism appears, the wisdom will disappear, and you really have to practice it. Wisdom is not enough when it comes to the 23 love enhancements I help couples develop in the Role Mate to Soulmate book.
Absolutely agree. And honestly, Warren, thank you. It's been such an honor. I don't even know if I'd be here if it wasn't for you and your books. And I mean, I've enjoyed them immensely, and I consider you a personal hero, and it's an honor to hopefully consider you a friend. So
absolutely, I love the way you're so enthusiastic. You're centered. You're balanced. You appreciate my gentleness because you are that way also.
Oh, thank you. Well, what a kind compliment. Thank you, Warren. And please go buy his book. Check out The Boy Crisis as well, especially. And thank you for your time.
It's been a real pleasure working with you and talking with you.
Thank you, Warren.